Let's discuss this drama which is going on Twitter and probably on some other platforms as well, which is this new AI editor called as PearAI, which says it's open source, it's an AI code editor, it's built on top of VS Code and Continue, which is another editor, which is also built on top of VS Code. So I just want to discuss what has happened in the last few days with this regards, walk you through a few important tweets and share my own opinion as well on these editors in general, which probably isn't what you're thinking. So where it started was, I think, from this tweet itself. So where they announced that PearAI is company which they applied in Y Combinator and got accepted. It's an open source AI code editor, which is like, everyone how it says like it's the best version of everything which is available. So that's the similar idea with them. But this tweet backfired a lot on these people. And I'll tell you like what happened. So if I can show you the community note, which was here, I think this is one of the few notes. I think community note has been removed from their tweet. Earlier it was there, but I can see it still because I'm a community notes editor. So you can see like there are a few notes which are already there, which is like, it says like PearAI is a fork of continue.dev, an open source AI code editor. PearAI used continue.dev's code and mass replaced all the references to continue to PearAI. Okay, a lot of things to grasp. So let's just try to open their GitHub first and let's just try to go back to, okay, they have changed a little bit of commit messages here and there also. So if you look at this commit, for example, where in this PearAI submodule, they renamed continue to PearAI. It's very clear in GitHub. You can see like all the occurrences where they have just changed the name from continue.dev to PearAI. So if you look at these two websites, they are pretty much doing the same things, right? So they are also, Continue is also creating an AI based editor and PearAI is also creating the same editor. Continue is also open source. PearAI is also open source. Continue is also built on VS Code. This one is also built on VS Code, but their definition of AI and open AI is like open source is basically slightly different in some nuanced way. To be very honest, it doesn't really matter, except until and unless your source code is anyway open, it doesn't really matter. Maybe the AIs which they are using as models are also running on computer. Maybe not. I don't know what's the crunch here. But the fundamental thing is that if you are just taking a project on GitHub, git cloning it, replacing all the occurrences like they have done, for example, in this specific commit, pushing it, applying to YC with a specific USP that, okay, we will just run the AI models on, user's device, for example, as a core differentiator. It's a great project, but I do agree with the stance here that this is something which should not be funded as a project, given that YC also has funded Continue. So YC has funded this project, YC has funded PearAI, YC has funded a few more projects in the same area. The idea is that YC probably is just funding every single player or every single major player which they think could become in the next few years, and they are betting that VS Code as an editor would probably not be as popular as it is right now, or Microsoft would not, be back with a very huge plugin or, very huge improvements in GitHub Copilot, which, to be honest, according to my opinion, seems very wrong, because this is something I also wrote as one of the tweets. So if you go back to one of the tweets which I just wrote a few weeks back, YC also funded the Void editor, right? Again, one of the things, but I don't get this, what's happening over here, because I for one know that Microsoft is very, very developer centric. For example, you will see Microsoft owning GitHub, NPM, TypeScript, Azure, VS Code. It has a lot of shares in OpenAI also. All of these editors which are getting funded, they almost always are building on top of VS Code. I have not seen any editor except Z which is getting built from scratch. These editors are built on top of VS Code, so they bring in all the bad things of VS Code also, whether in terms of performance or in terms of any sort of limitations which exist. For example, what Z is solving is for performance mainly. So all of those things are there. On top of that, they are trying to hack around a little bit of AI, for example, and they expect that this would blow up as an editor for, I don't know, for what use case. I don't see it in that way, to be very honest. I, as a developer, I'm not able to see it. I've not tried out this editor, the one Void editor, but I've tried out Cursor. I couldn't feel it. Like, my use case was great when it is combined with just Claude or, GPT outside of the editor. When I need the AI, I can just give it context and I can get the work done. I've tried Cursor, it interrupts a lot. I've tried GitHub Copilot also, it interrupts a lot. I don't use any AI plugins within the workflow itself. I use AI, but when it is required, I just use an external website like Claude or GPT or even codedam.com/AI, which is also GPT-4. But this tweet over here has backfired a lot, because what these guys effectively have done is Git cloning, rip off of an editor. There was some issue with license also. So someone community noted us that saying we are misleading people by not mentioning continue in this thread. We are way too open and transparent of a community for this slander. We have mentioned we are a fork of both VS Code and continue since day one and can be seen the first line of GitHub description. Okay. See, the problem here is that people are not coming after you. If this was launched as a project which was, great in terms of like you are forking VS Code and you're building on top of some of the functionalities, great. What you're doing is that you are forking an open source project, even raising funding on that based on some level of USP, and people just think that that value proposition doesn't exist. Why not continue.dev itself? Why not VS Code itself? Cursor, for example, I think has done a lot more optimizations on top of VS Code itself. I was reading their blog post the other day. I think this one are problems. Yeah. So these are some of the problems which Cursor is trying to solve from a fundamental level, right? If you look at softwares like these, even the, continue.dev, I would say probably, these softwares are great, but they are built on top of a very huge code base that already exists, that is VS Code. So the community problem, I feel, what people have been pointing out so far is that hey, you just raised a lot of funds based on somebody else's work, and then you are using those metrics, the contributor count and what we are doing, how we are doing it. You're using those metrics and boasting about your product. That is, I think, the fundamental problem with what has happened over here. I think there was another issue with the AGPL license over here, which I remember seeing. So you see, when they were renaming it from continue to PearAI, this was the only message which they wrote in the conversation. Now this might be a light, joke or something, but it of course turns out to be a bad thing if you view it from all the point of views. So they just mentioned it's ours now and just renamed it, I think 4 or 5 months ago, and they just merged it, right? So again, like they have then given explanation of why we are transparent and all, but still. So Pierre Richardson, who's also the founder of cal.com, has also written something about this, which I just want to quickly glance over. So he does say that I don't think funding forks is a winning strategy. I have yet to see a fork to be more successful than the initial steward. Looking at you, Bun. So Bun is not exactly a Node.js fork, but still. As of today, I don't see how VS Code needs a fork, and my point of view is that all these cute AI extensions are in fact VS Code extensions. I use Super Maven a lot, big fan. So this is something I also agree with at some point, even though I don't even use VS Code extensions, but I have used GitHub Copilot in past. I just don't use it because it interrupts a lot, but I feel like all of these softwares can be a functional. See, the bigger problem with software in general today, right now, is not people see that AI would just reinvent everything. It's not gonna happen. Software engineering is very deep. If you look at a project like VS Code and if you open it, you won't imagine how much work it takes to create something like a software that can open a file with 100,000 lines and then effectively render and syntax highlighting and do everything. If you think that your USP is just AI powered code editor and you just start to create that from scratch, you have to still solve a lot of problems that VS Code has already solved. That's why people fork over it and they just call it a day and just raise the funds and so on. The problem is that people are forgetting that it's really, really hard to build really, really good software and even harder to build great business. So that is where the focus should be, according to me, when you are funding somebody or when you are funding a potential. That is the team capable of solving really hard problems, which is what I am seeing here as well in this tweet, that he says that VS Code doesn't need a fork. Funding a fork of a fork is a next level uncertainty. So, I mean, yeah, continue.dev is a fork of VS Code. This new project, which is like questionable, is a fork of a fork. To make it open source, you need strong open source ethics. You are looking to build a community. Starting day one saying it's ours now is a crazy disrespectful, even if the fork is technically legal. It's highly unethical, and I don't think it's a great start to find PMF among developers. I 100% agree with this statement. For somebody, most of the developers at some point would have seen some level of open source work, or they realize like how difficult it is to build software. And even though it's like done in a lightweight manner, in a jokingly manner, it still feels a bit disrespectful for the original creators of the software. On the other hand, maybe VS Code has reached the infrastructure level where it's just too big to rebuild. Similarly, similar to Chromium. Every browser today out there is a Chromium fork, and we don't seem to care this much. Maybe true, but I mean, the counter example is that Zed is doing exactly what VS Code is, but from a very core scratch. So yeah. So AGPL helps a lot to migrate all of this, mitigate a lot of this. So what exactly is AGPL v3 license? I've heard about this license, but I just don't know. MIT, I know that's like a very permissive license. So AGPL v3 states that you must share any changes or improvements you make, especially if the people are using a version over the internet. MIT, you can do whatever you want. It's strict about sharing, while MIT license gives you much more freedom to use and change. Okay, fair enough. So yeah, that's it basically for this whole drama. Nothing serious, I think, has come out of it so far. Like maybe like people are attacking YC and all of that, but I don't know like how that would play out in long term. What do you think about this editor space in general? I mean, my stance is pretty clear. I am sticking with VS Code, and I know for a fact that these editors, they can get great, but it's a similar story like how Arc, for example, works as a browser. I still don't understand Arc as a browser in general. So as you can see, I'm of course using Chrome and Chromium. Similar thing exists with VS Code and in general with these browsers. Zed I like a lot because they are taking a bold move. They are starting from scratch what needs to be done, and it's interesting to see that somebody has the confidence to pull this off. These editors, they seem like a little bit of hacking around on top of VS Code, to be very honest. I mean, there is real engineering going on here over AI and what, for example, Cursor is doing. But what I'm still struggling to understand, why this cannot be a GitHub, why this cannot be a VS Code extension, right? VS Code extensions are very powerful. They allow you to inject into a lot of the ecosystem of VS Code, the editor, what happens when you're writing, whatever it is. And if that is something which is not fulfilling your need, why can't you contribute directly to VS Code? Of course, if you fork it and if you create a company, you get funding and you have the potential shot at, maybe disrupting VS Code space. But the problem is, if you think of it on a long-term basis, the problem is that Microsoft will catch up within the next 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, because it's a giant which is not sleeping. Look at VS Code repository right now. If you go to VS Code and if you open this GitHub, for example, the last commit was 10 minutes ago. Okay, it was 10 minutes ago. You cannot beat these people at their own game in terms of the quality of product they are building. Similarly, Microsoft is investing heavily in the developer space. GitHub extensions, Copilot, all of this. It's a losing battle in long term. That's all I'm saying. You might win a small market share right now, but unless you are taking a radically different approach and your core proposition is different, like Zed, for example, we'll also figure that out maybe in the next few months or years. But unless you're doing that, I think it's a losing strategy. And that is what I think is the core reason like why people are upset, that you get funding also, you raise around after forking it and just building a little bit of things here and there. But yeah, let me know what do you think about this. What editor do you use today yourself? Any AI tools which you're using right now to help you assist with coding? That is all for this one. I'm gonna see you in the next video really soon.